The sun had barely risen over the wide plantation when a new presence stirred the air, pulling the attention of every worker in the fields. Dust lifted in thin clouds as the carriage rolled toward the main house, its polished wheels grinding on the gravel like a quiet warning. Inside, a young man sat straight, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes, sharp and thoughtful, studied every detail of the estate he had just purchased a share of. She stepped down first, her small figure almost fragile against the tall carriage, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, the way she held her head high, the gentle grace in her steps. She was a slave, yes, but not one to be dismissed easily. The murmurs of the overseers and older slaves quietly spoke of her beauty, her intelligence, and most dangerously, the flicker of defiance in her dark eyes. The master watched from the veranda, his hands gripping the railing with a firmness that betrayed his usual calm. He had witnessed the arrival of countless slaves before, but this one unsettled him. It wasn't fear. He was a man familiar with authority, but something deeper stirred, something he had buried long ago beneath duty and expectation. She carried herself like a storm contained within a small cup, restrained yet undeniable. "Bring her forward," he commanded, his voice calm but edged with a faint tension. The young slave obeyed, her eyes briefly meeting his, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. She would survive here not by bending completely, but by walking the sharp line between obedience and subtle control. And he realized he could not look away. The day stretched long and unforgiving. She was assigned to the house, learning the exact rituals expected of a domestic slave, the careful polishing of silver, the arrangement of linens, the preparation of meals to precise standards. Yet even during this ordinary labor, she caught his attention. A small tilt of her head, the way her fingers moved gently, the faint sigh that revealed the human behind the perfect work. It followed him in his thoughts. By midday, the master had returned to his study, supposedly to manage business matters, yet he found himself watching from the doorway, observing her careful work. Every movement seemed arranged to test him, to draw him into some forbidden thought he dared not admit aloud. Even the house staff sensed it. Whispers drifted across the halls, eyes turning toward the master whenever she passed, noticing the tension in his stance, the slight tightening of his jaw. They did not speak of desire openly. It was a dangerous subject, but all understood the risky orbit she had entered. As the evening sun lowered, casting long shadows across the plantation, the master found himself walking to the veranda once again. She had finished her duties for the day and was resting briefly before the evening tasks. He lingered there, pretending to enjoy the breeze, but the truth was unavoidable. He was drawn to her against every rule of propriety, against every social expectation he had ever followed. She sensed his gaze. Of course, there was no denying it, not in her world or in his. And in that brief exchange of glances, a silent game began, one of power, temptation, and unspoken emotion. She would survive by playing it carefully. He would suffer quietly, caught in the pull of something he had never planned to feel. Before we continue with our story, I'd like to ask, if you're fascinated by these tales that blur the line between historical fact and legend, please subscribe to our channel and press the notification button so you never miss a story. Please leave a comment telling us which town or city you're watching from. We enjoy knowing where our community of mystery seekers is located. Now, let's continue. The morning light slipped through the tall windows of the main house, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits in the golden beams. The plantation was waking, but inside the house the rhythm of domestic life moved with a quieter, sharper pace. She was already awake, carrying herself with that careful balance of diligence and subtle confidence that seemed to irritate and fascinate him equally. The master stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching silently. His presence was commanding as always, but today there was a new tension, a tightness born from restless curiosity. He had spent the night thinking of her, replaying her gestures, her glances, the way she had met his eyes, with neither fear nor full submission. Something about her quiet defiance, restrained yet clear, unsettled him. "Bring the silverware to the dining hall," he ordered, his tone firm and controlled. She moved quickly, but there was no tremble in her hands, no pause in her steps, and yet, in the slight tilt of her head as she passed him, there was a challenge. He felt it instantly, a quiet reminder that she was not simply property to be directed. She was something else entirely, something living and unpredictable. The first test arrived unexpectedly. A guest came, an old business partner of the master, a man accustomed to praise and obedience. He was welcomed into the drawing room, and the young slave was assigned to serve refreshments. Every movement had to be perfect, every gesture measured, according to the strict etiquette the master demanded. Yet in the subtle way she offered the tea, the slight turn of her gaze, and the carefully timed pauses in her actions, she tested him. Would he interrupt, correcting her like every other slave he had commanded? Or would he allow this small sign of individuality to remain? He did not act. He could not. He felt the tension tighten in his chest, like a living force, a mixture of irritation, curiosity, and something far more dangerous. Each time she glanced toward him, she seemed to explore the limits of his control, and he found himself wanting not to punish her, but to see just how far this quiet power might reach. The guest left, completely unaware, yet the master remained standing in the room, watching her return to her tasks. And she, in turn, moved with a calm confidence that suggested she knew exactly the effect she had on him. It was a silent struggle, one that would shape their relationship in ways neither of them could yet understand. By midday, whispers of her presence began spreading among the house staff. They had always been cautious, careful of the master's temper, yet even they noticed the subtle shift in his behavior, an unusual hesitation, a softness in his gaze, reserved for no one else. The young slave, fully aware of the stir she had created, continued her work as though nothing had changed, even though everything had. In the late afternoon, the master found himself lingering near the veranda once again, supposedly reviewing ledgers, but in truth watching her from a distance. She moved through the rooms with effortless grace, attending to her responsibilities, yet each step, each glance seemed to pull at some hidden part of him he had long ignored. It was dangerous, it was forbidden, and he could not, would not, turn away. By the time evening arrived, the tension in the house was unmistakable. Lié retired briefly to her quarters, yet he knew, even from afar, that their connection had already begun to shape the atmosphere of the household. Something unspoken had passed between them, an understanding of power, desire, and the quiet games that would define the days ahead. The morning fog clung to the fields like a soft veil, smoothing the edges of the plantation, but doing nothing to ease the tension within the house. The master had barely slept, his thoughts restless with memories of her. Each task she performed echoed in his mind long after it ended, the memory of her movements burning in a way that both thrilled and disturbed him. She was assigned to oversee the preparation of the evening banquet, a duty usually given to the most experienced domestic slaves. The decision seemed intentional, an opportunity to test her composure under pressure, yet she accepted the challenge with quiet determination that only deepened his fascination. Every movement was careful and exact, and yet there was a gentle creativity in the way she arranged the silver, aligned the crystal glasses, and carried trays through the narrow hallways. It was artistry disguised as labor, and he watched from afar, unable to deny the pull she had over him. The first true test of their silent game came when a vase of rare flowers was accidentally knocked over. A nearby servant gasped, expecting punishment, but she simply bent to straighten the vase, her movements calm, her eyes briefly meeting his across the room. That single glance carried a weight he could not fully describe, a mixture of boldness and recognition. The master felt a strange tightness in his chest. He wanted to reprimand her, to remind her of the strict rules that governed every part of his estate. Yet something in her quiet defiance stopped him. He found himself watching her more closely, noticing the subtle changes in her expression, the way her fingers rested along the table edge, the faint warmth on her cheeks that no ordinary task should have created. It was during this careful dance of observation that the slave made her move, though he did not yet realize it. A small mistake in the arrangement of silver caught his attention, and he stepped toward her, preparing to correct her, as he had done so many times before. Yet before he could speak, she looked up and offered a slight mysterious smile, a silent acknowledgement that she was aware of his gaze. In that brief moment, the balance of power shifted almost invisibly. She had tested him, and he had paused. The rest of the day unfolded beneath a quiet tension. Every glance, every subtle gesture became part of a dangerous game. Neither could afford to misjudge. Even the house staff sensed the change. They whispered softly among themselves, careful not to attract the master's attention, yet unable to ignore the silent storm growing within the walls. By evening, the banquet had begun. Guests gathered inside the grand dining hall. By evening, the banquet had begun. Guests gathered inside the grand dining hall, piles unaware that beneath the polished manners and elegant setting, a far more complicated story was quietly unfolding. Dot arrived. The smell of roasted meat and fresh baked bread filling the wide dining hall. She moved among them with calm grace, serving without a single mistake, all while keeping that quiet presence that seemed to pull every eye toward her. Not only the master's, but everyone's. He watched, knowing it was no longer simple curiosity that kept his attention fixed on her. Desire had begun to grow, and it felt as strong as it was forbidden. He excused himself early from the gathering and stepped out to the veranda, where he could watch the grounds, and more importantly, watch her during a rare moment of quiet, alone time. She paused near a corner of the hall, adjusting a chair with careful focus, unaware, or perhaps completely aware of the effect she had on him. He stood there in silence, knowing the next steps would require a level of restraint he might not have. That night, the plantation felt heavier somehow, filled with the unspoken tension between master and slave. Neither of them could deny the dangerous connection slowly forming, a bond shaped by small acts of defiance, careful observation, and the first thin strands of obsession. It had become a game neither of them could easily step away from, and the rules had not yet been fully written. The storm arrived in the afternoon, not with thunder at the beginning, but with wind that bent the sugarcane into soft whispering waves and clouds that darkened the sky into shades of iron. The plantation slowed beneath its weight. Workers were pushed indoors or into storage sheds. Shutters pulled closed across the main house like blinking eyes. Inside, the hallways dimmed. Lamps were lit earlier than usual. Shadows stretched long and dramatic across the floors, and the master found himself restless, walking back and forth in his study while rain began tapping on the windows like impatient fingers. He had signed papers, corrected tallies, and dismissed an overseer. None of it stayed in his thoughts. She did. He heard her before he saw her. Soft footsteps, the faint clink of a tray. When she passed his open doorway, he lifted his head. She wore a simple work dress, sleeves rolled neatly, hair tied back. Yet there was something different in the way she moved today, more intentional, like a dancer who knows someone is watching. "Come here," he said before he could stop himself. The words dropped into the corridor like a stone falling into water. She paused slowly and turned. "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, almost too steady. She stepped into the study, pale rainlight flickering behind her through the tall windows. The hall windows, the tall windows. Room smelled of leather, ink, and polished wood, a place built for authority. He stood behind his desk, hands pressed against its edge, suddenly aware of how close she had come. "You were assigned to the West Hall," he said. "I finished early." A simple answer, clean and direct. His eyes searched her face for something, guilt perhaps, or doubt. He found neither, only that same quiet composure that had started to trouble his thoughts. He gestured toward the shelves behind him. "Dust those." She moved past him to obey, close enough that he noticed the faint scent of soap and rain clinging to her clothes. His jaw tightened. He turned away, too late. already aware that the air in the room had shifted, grown thick and charged, as if the storm outside had slipped indoors. She worked in silence. The brush whispered across the spines of books. Wood creaked under her shifting weight. Every small sound struck sharply in his ears. Then he noticed it. One of the ledgers on his desk had been moved, not far, just enough to break the careful alignment he kept without thinking. He turned. "Did you touch that?" She stopped brushing, looked at the book, then back at him. "Yes, sir." His brows drew together. "I did not tell you to. I thought it was in the way." A breath passed between them, slow and measured. "You thought," he repeated. "I did." It was the first time she had answered him, without lowering her eyes, not openly rebellious. Just level and honest in a way that brushed against the rules that controlled the house. Something inside him stirred, sharp and uneasy. "You are here to follow orders," he said, her chin lifted slightly. "I am." Not an argument, simply a statement. He stepped toward her before he even realized he had begun moving. She did not step back. Rain drummed harder against the windows, filling the room with a steady rhythm. For a moment, they stood far too close, close enough that he noticed a small scar near her collarbone, close enough that he could see her breathing become slightly quicker than before. "You are bold," he said quietly. Her lips curved just a little, not quite a smile, something more careful. "Only when necessary." The answer struck him harder than an insult might have. He should have dismissed her, sent her away, restored the distance that kept this world neat and predictable. Instead, he said, "Who taught you to rearrange a man's desk?" "No one." "Then why do it?" She paused briefly. The input, outside, thunder cracked suddenly, loud enough to make the windows tremble. Neither of them moved. That was the line. He felt it the moment the words left her mouth. "Because I could." Not because she believed it was helpful, not because she feared punishment, because she chose to do it. Something cold and fascinated tightened in his chest. "Leave," he said. The command was sharp and final. She did not hurry. She placed the brush down carefully, smoothed her dress, and walked past him toward the door with slow steps, almost as if daring him to change his mind. At the doorway she paused. "Yes, sir." He did not answer, did not turn, did not trust himself to speak. She left, but the room did not feel empty after she was gone. Her presence lingered like heat after lightning, unseen and impossible to ignore. He stared at the shifted ledger, then at the rain streaking the window glass, aware that something between them had changed. She had not raised her voice, had not disobeyed him, had not even touched him, yet she had crossed a line all the same. And the troubling part was not that she knew it, but that he had allowed it. Rumors never moved loudly across the plantation. They drifted like smoke through floorboards. A glance held a moment too long in a hallway, a task reassigned without explanation, a master lingering near the kitchen rather than the fields. By the third morning after the storm, the house pulsed with quiet speculation, and she felt it everywhere. In the way other servants watched her when they believed she was not looking, in the sudden silences when she stepped into a room, in the overseer's narrowed eyes when her name was called for new duties. The master pretended not to notice. That was the lie he repeated to himself while signing ledgers. He had already checked twice, dismissing workers with vague instructions and walking the halls with an alertness that betrayed him. He had ordered distance after that afternoon in his study. Fewer direct errands, fewer moments alone. It had not worked. If anything, the space only made her presence larger in his mind, like a ghost moving through bright daylight. So he did the worst possible thing. He brought her closer. The order came just after breakfast. She was to assist with the inventory of imported goods, fabrics, tools, and spirits stored in the rear wing of the house, a position that required daily interaction with him or his steward. Senior servants blinked at the announcement. The overseer stiffened. She kept her expression calm, though something flickered behind her eyes as quick as a spark in darkness. "Yes, sir," she said when called to hear the decision. He watched her carefully for a reaction, surprise perhaps, Gratitude, fear. She offered none of them. Only that same steady calm that unsettled him more than protest ever could. The storerooms were cool and dim, thick doors sealing away the heat. Dust floated through thin beams of light as E followed him down the narrow aisle between stacked crates and folded cloth. The scent of cedar and liquor soaked the air. "You will record what I dictate," he said. "I can read." He stopped walking for a moment. That too was new. "Who taught you?" She met his gaze. "Someone who no longer lives here." Not defiant, careful. He nodded once and continued walking, though the answer lodged inside him like a small splinter. They worked in close quarters, close enough that he heard the scratch of her pencil, close enough that her sleeve brushed his coat when she leaned to check a label. Every accidental touch landed with strange force, like a spark snapping across skin. He pretended was not sensitive to her presence. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm season had not finished with them yet. "You are precise," he said finally. She did not lift her head. "I try to be." A short pause passed. "Why?" That made her look at him. "Because mistakes are punished." The truth of it sat between them, heavy and unmoving. He felt an urge to deny it, to promise something he had no right to promise. Instead, he remained silent. The quiet stretched until it became thick and uncomfortable. By midday, sweat dampened his collar and her temples alike. He poured water from a pitcher and handed her a glass before thinking twice. Their fingers brushed. She froze for a brief moment. So did he. Then she took it. "Thank you, sir." The words were proper. The look she gave him held no submission at all. Across the plantation, eyes were watching. A maid passing the doorway slowed her step. The steward remained near the entrance longer than necessary. The overseer made a note he shared with no one. That evening, the master stood alone on the veranda while the sky burned orange beyond the fields. She passed below, carrying her ledger back to the records room. He called her name. She stopped and looked up. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will continue the inventory." A flicker crossed her face this time. Satisfaction, perhaps, or warning. "Yes, sir." When she walked away, he stayed there, staring over the darkening cane, aware that his choice had already begun spreading outward like ripples in water. Being closer to him meant safety in certain ways, and far greater danger in others. Behind the servants' quarters that night, whispers slowly sharpened. People spoke of favoritism, of watchful eyes, of how quickly a master's interest could turn into something far more complicated. Curse instead of a blessing. She lay awake long after the lamps had dimmed, staring at the low ceiling, replaying every glance, every pause, every nearly touch. She was not naive. She knew exactly how dangerous his attention could be. And yet, he stayed awake too, staring into the dark, knowing he had crossed a boundary, not with words or hands, but with paperwork and proximity. He had drawn her into his orbit, and the plantation, alive in its own way, had begun to notice. The overseer started to follow her, not openly, not with the dramatic cruelty some men enjoyed. This was quieter, a shadow near the storerooms, a pause at the kitchen door as she passed with a ledger tucked under her arm, questions asked of other servants, in a tone pretending to be casual. She noticed that those who survived long on plantations learned to feel changes in the air the way sailors sense storms before clouds appear. And something had shifted again. The master's new assignments placed her in hallways that echoed, in rooms where authority gathered. That kind of visibility always brought danger. The master sensed it too. He heard the overseer's name too often in passing, caught glimpses of him watching from railings or door frames, not boldly challenging, but studying, measuring. It annoyed him more than he liked to admit. On the third day of inventory, the overseer appeared in the storeroom doorway, arms crossed, boots dusted with red earth. "Didn't know you were rearray signing clerks," he said. The master did not look up from the crate list. "She's efficient." The overseer's gaze slid toward her, lingering. "She's new. So am I." the master replied coolly. That earned a thin smile. She kept writing, eyes on the page, though she felt the weight of that stare like a hand pressing against her back. When the overseer left, the room seemed to exhale. You should work in the rear rooms tomorrow, the master said quietly, without looking at her. She understood immediately. Fewer eyes, safer, but safety on a plantation was never constant. It only changed form. That afternoon, a crate of imported rum went missing. Just one bottle, lifted with careful fingers. The steward discovered it during his count and reported it, voice stiff with unease. Theft was never taken lightly. The master questioned the workers from the storage wing. One by one, voices low, faces blank with fear. Then the overseer spoke the thought. Everyone else avoided. She's been working closest to the stock. Silence thickened. The master felt it hit like a blow. He turned slowly. Are you accusing her? I'm saying she had opportunity. Eyes slid toward her. She stood straight, hands folded, expression unreadable. Inside, calculation raced. Opportunity was often all men needed. I didn't take anything, she said. The overseer's smile returned. Didn't say you did. But the implication hung like smoke. The master's voice hardened. He searched the other workers. We will. The emphasis was pointed. Hours passed. No bottle appeared. Tension wound tighter every minute. By evening, the master dismissed everyone except her and the steward. You may go, he told the steward after questions ended. When they were alone, she spoke first. You think it was me? He looked at her sharply. No. The answer came too fast to be calculated. She studied him. You didn't hesitate, Tay. That was dangerous. He exhaled through his nose. You are not careless. And the others, I don't know which was truth. Outside, voices drifted across the yard. The overseer, laughing with two field hands. A sound that did not belong in this conversation. They're watching me, she said quietly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He stiffened. Who them? A beat. I noticed. He said. She met his eyes. Then why keep me there? The question cut closer than he expected. He could have said efficiency, coincidence, or said nothing. Instead he said, because you're useful. Half truth, half cowardice. Her gaze sharpened. Being useful gets people hurt. He did not deny it. That night, he doubled patrols near the store wing without explanation. The overseer raised a brow but obeyed. In his room, long after the lamps were out, the master stayed awake, listening to distant insects and the faint churn of the fields in the wind. He had protected her subtly, quietly, enough that anyone paying attention would notice. Across the quarters, she lay on her side, staring at the wall, replaying his voice when he had said no. No hesitation, no doubt. That was more frightening than accusation because it meant he had chosen her. And once a master chose, nothing stayed simple for long. The missing bottle never reappeared. By the third day, that alone was accusation enough. Plantations ran on fear, as much as labor, and theft demanded a display. The overseer made sure the rumor spread before any verdict. Field hands murmured in the rows. Kitchen workers exchanged tight looks. Even the stable boys slowed when she passed, eyes sliding away too quickly. She felt the tension long before anyone named it. The master noticed too. Conversations died near her. The overseer positioned himself at intersections she had to cross. Guards lingered longer near the store wing than anywhere else. It was turning public. Dangerous. He summoned the steward at dawn. Voices were low. Doors closed. Orders given without explanation. Inventory checked again. Questioning widened. Nothing surfaced, which made the overseer angrier. Late afternoon, while workers were released, he called across the yard. You. She froze. Every head turned. Come here. Her feet moved before fear could argue. Gravel crunched under thin shoes as the sun hung low and merciless overhead. The master stood on the veranda, papers in hand, mid-conversation with a visiting merchant. The overseer's voice carried. You were last assigned to the rum crates. Yes, sir. And now one is missing. I didn't take it. A ripple passed through the gathered workers. The overseer tilted his head. Search her. The word cracked like a whip. 2 guards shifted. The master felt something snap tight in his chest. No. The single syllable cut through the yard. Every face lifted to the veranda. The overseer turned slowly. Sir, I said no. Silence expanded. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. She's cleared. The master continued. You will stand down. The overseer's jaw flexed. With respect, sir, we haven't finished. You have. The merchant on the veranda pretended to study the fields. No one else pretended. She stood still, heart pounding. The overseer's eyes flicked to her, then back to the master. Something cold and amused passed through them. As you say, he stepped back, but the retreat was temporary. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring. She did not move until the master gave a slight nod. Later, she was summoned to his study. The door closed with a soft, deliberate click. You should not have been questioned like that, he said, his voice steady. His hands were not. One rested too long on the desk edge. They would have searched me. Yes. A beat. You stopped them. I did. She studied him, fierce and searching. Why? Not respectful. He did not correct her, because there was no proof. She waited. Silence stretched thin as wire. That's not all, she said. He did not answer. You stood in front of everyone. I gave an order. You chose. The word hung between them. He took a slow breath. Yes, it was the closest to confession he had come. Her shoulders dropped fractionally, relief leaking through control. Then anger slid in behind it, sharp and sudden. They'll come for me again. I know they won't forget this. No. He stepped closer before realizing it, stopped an arm's length away. I can't protect you from everything, he said quietly. She lifted her chin. Then stop putting me where you have to. The truth landed hard. They stood too near too long. The room felt smaller, air thick with unspoken things. Outside the window, workers crossed the yard, glancing at the study without knowing why. He spoke first. You are to avoid the store wing. Then what? You'll work upstairs. Her eyes widened despite herself. Closer, more visible, more dangerous differently. Sir, she said carefully, that will make things worse. He knew, and did it anyway. Do as I say. She held his gaze, searching for something. Found too much? Yes, sir. As she turned, he caught himself just before reaching for her arm. The door shut behind her. He exhaled like a man, surfacing from water. Across the yard, the overseer watched the study window with narrowed eyes. Something had just been revealed. Not love, not yet, but preference. On a plantation, preference was a spark thrown into dry grass. Night did not come quietly. It slid over the plantation like ink spilled across paper, swallowing lantern light and muting fields into vast breathing shadows. Crickets sang too loudly. Dogs barked without reason. Somewhere far off, a horse stamped in its stall. The master stood at his bedroom window long after the house had settled, watching the glow of torches drift along the outer fence. Patrols, his order, and yet unease, crawled under his skin. He had made her visible again. Down in the servants' quarters, she sat on the edge of her narrow cot. Hands clasped so tightly her knuckles widened. The confrontation in the yard replayed again and again. The master's voice cracking through the crowd, the overseer's smile when he had backed away. She did not trust smiles like that. A soft rap touched the doorframe. It was Mara, a kitchen worker who had survived long enough to keep her head low and her ears open. They're talking, Mara whispered. 2 men near the stables. Overseer's been drinking. Cold slid through her stomach. What kind of talking? The kind that comes after. She thanked her and lay back, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. If something happened, it would not be loud at first. It never was. Someone would accuse. Someone would drag. Someone would make an example. She had lived long enough to know the shape of those nights. In the main house, the master felt the same premonition without knowing why. He left his room, coat thrown over a nightshirt, boots unlaced. The halls were dark, servants asleep, or pretending to be. He found the steward near the back stairwell. "Wake the guards on the south end," he said. "Sir." Now by the time torches flickered brighter near the quarters, a knot of men had already formed. Not large, 5 or 6. Enough. The overseer's voice floated above them, thick with drink. "She thinks she's protected," he was saying. "Let's see." The master arrived before the thought finished forming in anyone else's head. "Step away from the building." The words carried steel. The group turned, some startled, some irritated. The overseer blinked, then smiled. "Evening, sir. You will return to your rooms." "It's late," the overseer said mildly. "We were just talking." "Not here." The master's eyes cut to the guards he had summoned. They fanned out without speaking. She stood just inside the doorway, shadows clinging to her frame. He saw her then, hair catching lantern light, watching him. The overseer followed his gaze. "Ah," he said softly. That was all it took. The master moved, one step forward. "This ends," he said. "Ends what?" "You using suspicion as sport." The overseer's smile thinned. "Careful." The word was almost soft. The air went taut. "You forget who owns this land," the overseer added. The master's voice dropped. "You forget who runs it." A heartbeat stretched. Then the overseer laughed. "You'd risk your reputation over one slave." The sentence struck like a hammer. Silence swallowed the yard. The master did not look away. Yes, it was the first time he had said it out loud. Not to her, not to himself, not to anyone. The overseer stared at him, recalculating. "That's a dangerous confession. I'm aware people will talk. They already are." He gestured to the guards. "Disperse this." They did reluctantly. "Quickly," the overseer lingered. "This isn't finished," he murmured. "No," the master agreed, but his eyes promised something else entirely. When the yard emptied, she was still standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. His breath left him in a slow exhale. "I know. You just painted a target on both of us." "Yes." She folded her arms. "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The lanterns guttered, throwing moving shadows across his face. "Because I couldn't let them touch you." There it was. Not poetry, not Roman. It's truth. Her throat tightened. "That doesn't make me safe," she said. "No," he replied. "It makes you chosen." The word frightened them both. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I changed the rules on a plantation as much as a man can." She stared at him, searching for weakness, for manipulation, for the shape of a trap. Found instead something far more volatile. Resolve, he stopped at the foot of the veranda. "You will be moved to rooms inside the house," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "That will make them furious." "I don't care. That's not wise." "I didn't say it was." A wind passed through the trees, rattling leaves like distant applause or warning. She took a breath. "You can't keep doing this." "I already am." They stood there, master and slave, bound by a choice neither could undo. Above them, the plantation slept fitfully. Below them, something old and cruel had been challenged, and somewhere in the dark, consequences were already learning their way toward daylight.